Daniel Noboa's midnight phone call, the decision that changed a nation's history in 48 hours. The clock struck exactly 11:47 p.m. In the depths of Carondelet Palace, only one light remained burning in President Daniel Noboa's private study. While Quito slumbered in the cold mountain night, Ecuador's youngest president sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the phone in his hand. The name flashing on the screen would bring the call that would forever alter his life and his nation's destiny. When the phone rang, Noboa's hand trembled for just a moment. He had been expecting this call, yet he wasn't truly prepared for it. As he lifted the receiver, the voice from the other end would compel him to make the most important decision of his presidency. Within 48 hours, Ecuador's history would turn to an entirely new chapter. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier than in that moment. At 36 years old, Daniel Noboa carried the hopes and dreams of 18 million Ecuadorians on his shoulders. The economic challenges, social tensions, and regional instabilities had created a perfect storm that demanded unprecedented solutions. But this phone call would offer an unexpected opportunity to address all of these issues simultaneously. The silence of that night was profound. Outside, Quito's ancient streets lay empty, save for the occasional taxi navigating the winding roads of the historic center. Inside the presidential palace, the only sounds were the ticking of an antique clock and the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Noboa had dismissed his security detail hours earlier, insisting he needed complete privacy for what was to come. The caller was a figure of international renown, someone who had been quietly observing Ecuador's potential for years. This individual possessed the resources, connections, and vision to transform nations. Their voice carried the weight of authority mixed with genuine excitement. "President Noboa," the voice began, "I'm calling with a proposition that could elevate Ecuador to become one of Latin America's most influential nations." Noboa leaned back in his leather chair, the same chair that had been occupied by presidents before him, each facing their own moment of historical significance. But none had faced quite what he was about to confront. The caller's tone was serious yet hopeful, carrying the promise of transformation that Ecuador desperately needed. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that this was no ordinary business proposal. The caller had conducted extensive research on Ecuador's geopolitical position, natural resources, and the potential of its young population. "President, your vision combined with your nation's assets could facilitate a remarkable transformation. However, this requires bold steps and unwavering commitment." The caller painted a picture of Ecuador's possibilities that was both inspiring and daunting. They spoke of infrastructure projects that could rival those of developed nations, technological advancement that could leapfrog decades of development, and economic growth that could eliminate poverty within a generation. But with great opportunity came great risk, and Noboa understood that every word carried monumental implications. As the phone conversation progressed, Noboa found himself face to face with an opportunity of unprecedented scale. The caller outlined a comprehensive plan that would touch every aspect of Ecuadorian society, from modernizing the country's transportation networks to revolutionizing its educational system, from diversifying its economy beyond oil dependence to establishing Ecuador as a regional hub for innovation and technology. The scope was breathtaking. The caller described partnerships with international organizations, investments from sovereign wealth funds, and collaboration with leading universities and research institutions worldwide. Ecuador would become a testing ground for sustainable development practices, a model for other developing nations to follow. But Noboa was no stranger to grand promises. His background in business had taught him to scrutinize every detail, to understand the fine print, and to calculate risks with mathematical precision. As he listened, he mentally cataloged every claim, every projection, every assumption underlying this ambitious vision. The caller seemed to anticipate his analytical approach. "President Noboa, I understand your cautious nature. That's precisely why you're the right leader for this initiative. Within the next hour, you'll receive a comprehensive dossier containing every detail of our proposal: financial projections, implementation timelines, risk assessments, and contingency plans. Everything you need to make an informed decision. The conversation took on an urgent tone. However, I must emphasize the time-sensitive nature of this opportunity. Global economic conditions, political alignments, and market dynamics have created a unique window. This window will remain open for exactly 48 hours from the moment you receive the dossier. After that, the opportunity will pass to another nation. Noboa felt the weight of this timeline. 48 hours to decide the future of his country. 48 hours to evaluate a proposal that could either elevate Ecuador to unprecedented heights or potentially expose it to unforeseen risks. The caller's words echoed in the presidential study. President, this is Ecuador's moment. The question is whether you're prepared to seize it. As promised, the dossier arrived within the hour. A black sedan with diplomatic plates pulled up to the palace's private entrance. A courier, flanked by security personnel, delivered a sealed briefcase directly to President Noboa's study. The briefcase bore no markings, no indication of its contents or origin, yet Noboa knew it contained Ecuador's potential future. The president dismissed his staff and locked his office door. The weight of the briefcase felt symbolic as he placed it on his desk. Inside, he found meticulously organized documents, economic analyses, engineering reports, social impact studies, and detailed financial projections. The scope was staggering, over 500 pages of comprehensive planning. The opening page bore a simple title: Ecuador 2030, a new economic paradigm and sustainable development initiative. Beneath it, a subtitle that made Noboa's pulse quicken: Transforming a Nation, Inspiring a Continent. This wasn't merely an economic proposal. It was a blueprint for comprehensive national transformation. The executive summary painted a picture of Ecuador that seemed almost too good to be true. GDP growth projections showed potential increases of 40% within 5 years. Unemployment could be reduced to historically low levels. The country's Human Development Index could rival those of developed nations. Infrastructure rankings could place Ecuador among the top nations globally. But Noboa's business acumen kicked in immediately. He began scrutinizing the assumptions, questioning the projections, and analyzing the underlying data. The financial requirements were substantial, though not insurmountable. The proposed partnerships were with legitimate, well-established international entities. The technology transfers were based on proven innovations already successful in other markets. As dawn broke over Quito, President Noboa was still immersed in the documents. He had consumed countless cups of coffee and filled several notebooks with his observations, questions, and calculations. The plan was comprehensive beyond anything he had ever encountered, yet it was grounded in solid economic principles and realistic implementation strategies. The infrastructure component alone was revolutionary. The proposal included a complete modernization of Ecuador's transportation network, including high-speed rail connections between major cities, expansion of the port facilities to accommodate next-generation shipping, and development of a world-class international airport that could serve as a regional hub. The technology sector development plan was equally ambitious. Ecuador would establish itself as a leader in renewable energy, particularly in solar and wind power generation. The country's unique geographical position would be leveraged to create data centers powered entirely by clean energy, attracting international technology companies seeking sustainable operations. The educational transformation component addressed one of Ecuador's most critical needs. The plan proposed partnerships with leading international universities to establish satellite campuses in Ecuador, massive investment in digital learning infrastructure, and comprehensive teacher training programs. Within a decade, Ecuador's educational system could rank among the world's best. But perhaps most intriguingly, The plan addressed social equity directly. Economic growth would be coupled with programs to ensure that prosperity reached every segment of society. Rural development initiatives would modernize agricultural practices while preserving traditional cultures. Urban planning would focus on sustainable, livable cities that promoted social cohesion. The more Noboa read, the more he realized that this wasn't just an economic development plan. It was a vision for creating a model society that could inspire other nations throughout Latin America and beyond. By mid-morning, President Noboa knew he needed additional perspectives, but the sensitive nature of the proposal required careful consideration of whom to consult. He decided to call a meeting with his most trusted advisors, though he would not reveal the full details of the proposal until he had made his decision. The meeting convened in the palace's secure conference room. Present were his economic advisor, Dr. Maria Santos, a brilliant economist with experience at the World Bank, his chief of staff, Carlos Mendez, a pragmatic political operative who had helped navigate Noboa's rise to the presidency, and his foreign affairs advisor, Ambassador Roberto Paz, a veteran diplomat with deep knowledge of international relations. Noboa began with a hypothetical scenario. Suppose Ecuador had the opportunity to implement a comprehensive development program that could transform our nation within a decade. What would be the key considerations in evaluating such an opportunity? Dr. Santos leaned forward, intrigued. Mr. President, the primary considerations would be financial sustainability, implementation capacity, and social acceptance. Any transformative program would need to demonstrate clear return on investment, realistic timelines, and broad public support. Ambassador Paz nodded in agreement. Additionally, we would need to consider geopolitical implications. Major development initiatives inevitably affect regional power dynamics and international relationships. We would need to ensure that Ecuador maintains its sovereignty while benefiting from international partnerships. Carlos Mendez, ever the political strategist, focused on practical concerns. The political feasibility would be crucial. Even the best plan would fail without proper legislative support and effective communication to the public. We would need to build consensus and manage expectations carefully. These insights resonated with Noboa's own analysis. The advisors were identifying the same critical factors he had been contemplating throughout the night. Their responses gave him confidence that his evaluation process was thorough and realistic. After the meeting, Noboa returned to his private study for continued analysis. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the documents spread on his desk. The contrast between the bright daylight and the weighty decision before him felt symbolic of his presidency itself, the optimism of youth confronting the serious responsibilities of leadership. He thought about his journey to the presidency. At 36, he had become Ecuador's youngest elected president, bringing energy and fresh perspectives to a nation tired of traditional politics. His background in business had provided him with analytical skills and an understanding of economic dynamics that many career politicians lacked. But this decision would test every aspect of his preparation and judgment. The phone rang, interrupting his contemplation. It was his wife calling to check on him. "Daniel, you missed lunch again. The staff is worried about you. Is everything all right?" Her voice grounded him, reminding him of the personal stakes involved in his decision. "I'm wrestling with a very important decision that could affect the entire country," he replied. "I need to be absolutely certain I'm making the right choice." "You always do," she said, with the confidence that had supported him throughout his political career. "Trust your instincts. They've brought you this far." After the call, Noboa reflected on the personal cost of leadership. Every major decision affected not just him, but his family, his supporters, and ultimately every citizen of Ecuador. The weight of representing 18 million people in this choice was both humbling and motivating. As the second day progressed, Noboa focused on the international dimensions of the proposal. Ecuador's geographical position had always been strategically significant. the plan would elevate the country to a new level of international prominence. Located between Colombia and Peru, with access to both the Pacific Ocean and the Amazon rainforest, Ecuador occupied a unique position that could be leveraged for regional leadership. The proposal outlined how Ecuador could become a bridge between North and South America, facilitating trade and cultural exchange throughout the hemisphere. The enhanced infrastructure would make Ecuador a natural hub for logistics and transportation, while the technological investments would position the country as a center for innovation and digital services. But Noboa also considered potential challenges. Rapid development could strain Ecuador's institutions and social fabric. International partnerships, while beneficial, could create dependencies that might limit future flexibility. The success of the plan would require not just initial implementation, but sustained commitment over many years, potentially spanning multiple presidential administrations. The geopolitical calculations were complex. Ecuador's relationship with neighboring countries would inevitably be affected by dramatic economic growth and increased international attention. Regional power dynamics within Latin America could shift, potentially creating both opportunities and tensions. Noboa spent considerable time analyzing how other countries had managed similar transformations. He studied cases from Singapore, South Korea, and Chile, nations that had successfully navigated rapid development while maintaining political stability and social cohesion. The lessons learned from these examples would be crucial for Ecuador's success. The financial components of the proposal required Noboa's most careful scrutiny. His business background had taught him to examine every assumption and stress test every projection. The numbers were impressive, but they were also dependent on numerous variables that could affect outcomes. The initial investment requirements were substantial but manageable. The proposal included diverse funding sources: international development banks, sovereign wealth funds, private investors, and strategic partnerships with multinational corporations. The risk was distributed across multiple entities, reducing Ecuador's exposure while maintaining national control over key decisions. Revenue projections were based on conservative estimates of economic growth, job creation, and increased productivity. Even if the plan achieved only 70% of its projected outcomes, Ecuador would still experience transformative improvement in living standards and international competitiveness. The risk mitigation strategies were comprehensive. Contingency plans addressed potential economic downturns, political changes, and technical challenges. Insurance mechanisms would protect against major risks, while flexible implementation schedules would allow for adjustments based on changing circumstances. Noboa created his own financial models, testing various scenarios and sensitivities. His analysis confirmed that the proposal was financially sound, with multiple pathways to success and reasonable protections against failure. The potential returns far outweighed the risks, particularly given Ecuador's current economic challenges. One aspect of the proposal that particularly appealed to Noboa was its attention to social equity and cultural preservation. Ecuador's rich indigenous heritage and diverse cultural traditions would not only be protected, but celebrated and integrated into the development process. The plan included specific provisions for indigenous communities, ensuring that development would enhance rather than threaten traditional ways of life. Educational programs would be bilingual, preserving indigenous languages while providing access to modern knowledge and skills. Economic opportunities would be created in rural areas, reducing urban migration pressures while maintaining cultural connections to ancestral lands. Environmental protection was woven throughout the proposal. Ecuador's unique biodiversity, from the Galapagos Islands to the Amazon rainforest, would be safeguarded through sustainable development practices. The country would become a global leader in ecotourism and environmental research, creating economic value from conservation rather than exploitation. The social programs included comprehensive healthcare reform, housing development for low-income families, and job training programs that would ensure all Ecuadorians could participate in the economic transformation. The goal was not just to increase GDP, but to create a more equitable society where prosperity was shared broadly. As the 48-hour deadline approached, President Noboa had filled dozens of pages with notes, calculations, and strategic considerations. The proposal had been examined from every conceivable angle. He had consulted his advisors, analyzed the financial projections, considered the international implications, and evaluated the social impact. The evidence was overwhelming. This was an opportunity that might not come again in his lifetime. The risks were manageable, the potential rewards were transformative, and the timing was optimal. Ecuador was ready for bold leadership and visionary thinking. But even with all his analysis, Noboa knew that ultimately, this decision would be based on more than spreadsheets and strategic planning. It would require faith in Ecuador's potential, confidence in his own leadership abilities, and trust that the Ecuadorian people would embrace the challenges and opportunities ahead. He thought about his campaign promises to bring change to Ecuador, to modernize the economy, and to improve living standards for all citizens. This proposal offered a pathway to achieve those goals more comprehensively and rapidly than he had ever imagined possible. The final hours were spent not in further analysis, but in quiet contemplation. Noboa walked through the palace halls, thinking about the presidents who had preceded him and the challenges they had faced. None had confronted an opportunity quite like this one, but each had been forced to make difficult decisions that shaped Ecuador's future. At exactly 11:30 p.m. on the second day, with just 17 minutes remaining until the deadline, President Noboa picked up his phone. The number was programmed from the original call, and he dialed without hesitation. The phone rang twice before the familiar voice answered. President Noboa, I hope you've had sufficient time to consider our proposal. I have, Noboa replied, his voice steady and confident. After extensive analysis and careful consideration, Ecuador accepts your proposal. We are ready to begin this historic transformation. The relief and excitement in the caller's voice was palpable. Excellent decision, Mr. President. You've chosen to lead Ecuador into a new era of prosperity and international prominence. History will remember this moment as the turning point for your nation. The practical details were quickly arranged. Implementation would begin within 30 days, with the first phase focusing on infrastructure development and institutional capacity building. A joint coordination committee would be established to oversee the program, with representatives from Ecuador and the international partners. As Noboa hung up the phone, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The decision was made, and there was no turning back. The next phase of his presidency would be defined by implementing this ambitious vision and managing the transformation of Ecuador. The following morning brought a new energy to Carondelet Palace. President Noboa arrived early, knowing that the real work was just beginning. The decision to accept the proposal was only the first step. Successful implementation would require extraordinary dedication and skill. His first priority was assembling the team that would manage the transformation. This would require the best minds in Ecuador, supplemented by international experts who could provide specialized knowledge and experience. The program would demand excellence in project management, financial oversight, and stakeholder communication. Noboa also knew that public communication would be crucial. The Ecuadorian people deserved to understand the vision for their country's future and their role in achieving it. The announcement would need to be carefully crafted to build excitement while managing expectations, to inspire confidence while acknowledging challenges. The international coordination would be equally complex. Ecuador would be working with partners from multiple countries and organizations, each with their own priorities and procedures. Diplomatic skill would be essential to maintain productive relationships while protecting Ecuador's interests. Legal and regulatory frameworks would need to be updated to accommodate the new development model. Environmental protection standards would be strengthened, investment incentives would be revised, and governance structures would be modernized. The legislative agenda for the coming months would be ambitious and consequential. As President Noboa stood at his office window, Looking out over Quito's ancient streets and modern buildings, he envisioned the Ecuador of 2030. The transformation would touch every aspect of national life, from the smallest rural communities to the bustling urban centers. Children would attend schools equipped with the latest technology and taught by the best trained teachers in Latin America. Young people would have access to university education that rivaled the finest institutions anywhere in the world. Entrepreneurs would start businesses supported by modern infrastructure and access to international markets. Farmers would use precision agriculture techniques to increase productivity while preserving soil and water resources. Manufacturers would produce goods for export to markets throughout the Americas and beyond. Service industries would flourish as Ecuador became a destination for business, tourism, and innovation. The environment would be cleaner and better protected. Renewable energy would power economic growth while reducing carbon emissions. Conservation programs would safeguard biodiversity while creating jobs and research opportunities. Ecuador would demonstrate that economic development and environmental stewardship could be complementary rather than competing goals. Most importantly, the benefits of growth would be shared equitably. Poverty would decline dramatically, healthcare would be accessible to all, and social mobility would increase. Ecuador would become a model of inclusive development that other nations would seek to emulate. The midnight phone call that had started this journey will be remembered as one of the most consequential moments in Ecuador's history. Like other pivotal decisions made by leaders facing uncertain futures, it would be studied by historians, analyzed by economists, and debated by political scientists. But for President Daniel Noboa, the significance was more personal and immediate. He had chosen to bet on Ecuador's potential, to trust in his people's capabilities, and to embrace a vision of transformation that few leaders ever have the opportunity to pursue. The 48 hours of decision-making had tested every aspect of his preparation for leadership. His business experience had provided analytical tools, his political instincts had guided strategic thinking, and his personal values had ensured that the decision served Ecuador's long-term interests. The success of this initiative would not be measured only in economic statistics or international rankings, though those would certainly be important. The true measure would be whether Ecuador fulfilled its potential as a nation where all citizens could prosper, where natural beauty was preserved for future generations, and where innovation and tradition could coexist harmoniously. As the sun set over the Andes Mountains, President Noboa returned to his desk to begin the detailed work of implementation. The historic decision had been made, but the historic achievement would require years of dedicated effort. The midnight phone call had opened the door to Ecuador's future. Now it was time to walk through that door with confidence and determination. The transformation of Ecuador had begun, and history would remember Daniel Noboa as the young president who had the vision and courage to seize an unprecedented opportunity for his nation. The 48 hours that changed everything were now part of the past, but their consequences would shape Ecuador's future for generations to come.